The rain began as a rumor, a darkening of the afternoon sky that felt more like a mood than a weather forecast. I'd ignored it, hunched over my laptop, chasing a deadline that paid too little for the amount of anxiety it produced. When I finally surrendered and stepped outside, the sky had broken open. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge, a solid sheet of water that turned the familiar city street into a churning, gray river. My thin jacket was soaked through in seconds, the cold seeping straight into my bones. I huddled under the narrow awning of a closed bookstore, shivering, watching my bus pull away from the stop a block down. Another would be along in 20 minutes. 20 minutes in this cold, wet misery. My shoulders slumped. It was just one more small, dreary defeat in a long line of them. This was my life now, a series of minor inconveniences that, when strung together, formed a suffocating chain of mediocrity. I was 26, living in an apartment the size of a closet, and my most meaningful relationship was with the barista who knew my coffee order by heart. A shadow fell over me, larger and darker than the awning's meager protection. I looked up and my breath caught. It was him, Mr. Julian Thorne, the owner of my building, and, if the city's business journals were to be believed, the owner of a great many other things besides. He was a man carved from stillness and quiet authority, somewhere in his late 40s, with silver threading his dark hair at the temples and eyes that saw everything without seeming to look. He held a large, black umbrella, a sturdy, expensive-looking thing that created a perfect circle of dryness in the chaos of the storm. He stood there for a moment, simply observing me, his expression unreadable. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment crawl up my neck. I must have looked like a drowned rat, plastered hair and clothes clinging to my skinny frame. I was just another tenant, another line item in his vast portfolio. He probably didn't even know my name. "You're going to catch a chill," he said. His voice was exactly as I'd imagined it would be, low and calm, a steady baritone that seemed to absorb the frantic noise of the rain. It wasn't a question or a judgment, just a simple statement of fact. I could only manage a weak nod, my teeth chattering slightly. My bus just left. He tilted the umbrella, extending its sanctuary toward me. "Our building is only a block away. Allow me." It was an offer, polite and distant. But coming from him, it felt like a royal decree. I hesitated, a knot of social anxiety tightening in my stomach. To stand that close to him, to be the recipient of his notice, felt both terrifying and deeply, shamefully desirable. I had nursed a quiet, impossible crush on Julian Thorne since the day I moved in, a fascination built from fleeting glimpses in the lobby and the scent of expensive cologne that lingered in the elevator after he'd been in it. He was a figure from a different world, one of tailored suits, quiet confidence, and an orderliness I could only dream of. "I don't want to be a bother," I mumbled, the words tasting foolish as soon as they left my mouth. A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed his face. "It's no bother. It's simply practical." He stepped closer, leaving me no room for polite refusal. The air around him smelled of rain, clean wool, and that subtle, expensive scent I recognized. It was grounding. I took a tentative step out from under the awning and into the dry space he had made for me. His arm came around behind me, not quite touching, just a presence in the space. The heat of his body was a tangible thing against the damp chill. We started walking, the rhythmic tap of his leather-soled shoes on the wet pavement a steady counterpoint to the drumming rain. But the angle was wrong. The wind whipped a spray of cold water against my side, and I flinched. This is when his hand, warm and firm, settled on the small of my back. The contact was a shock, a sudden point of heat that radiated through my soaked shirt and spread through my entire body. It wasn't a casual touch. It was deliberate, grounding, a quiet assertion of command. "Closer," he said, his voice low and near my ear, "or you'll get wet." I obeyed without thinking, my body moving into his, pressing against his side until my shoulder was tucked neatly under his arm. The fine wool of his overcoat was solid and warm against me. I could feel the hard muscle of his side, the steady rhythm of his breathing. My own breath hitched, and I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, intensely aware of the weight of his palm, a small, proprietary pressure that held me in place. In that small, shared bubble of dryness, the world outside fell away. There was only the sound of the rain on the taut fabric of the umbrella, the scent of him, and the solid, unbelievable warmth of his hand on my back. We walked the rest of the block in a silence that felt charged with meaning, though I knew it was probably just in my head. For him, this was likely a simple act of courtesy, a landlord looking out for a tenant. For me, it felt like a tectonic shift, a moment that reconfigured the landscape of my lonely existence. When we reached the brass and glass doors of our building, the doorman, a kind older man named Henry, rushed to open it, his eyes flicking from Mr. Thorne to me, tucked against his side, and then quickly away. Inside the warm, marble-floored lobby, the sounds of the storm faded to a distant murmur. Mr. Thorne collapsed the umbrella with a neat, efficient snap, shaking a few stray droplets onto the welcome mat. He released me, and the sudden loss of his warmth was a physical ache. I stood there awkwardly, dripping onto the polished floor. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice sounding small and reedy. "I really appreciate it." He turned to face me fully. His eyes, a deep, thoughtful gray, held mine for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. He wasn't just looking at me. He was seeing me. I felt a strange urge to straighten my spine, to try and look like someone worthy of that focused attention. "It was nothing, Leo," he said. He knew my name. The thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. Of course he knew my name. He owned the building. He would have my rental agreement, my file, my information. It was foolish to be surprised. And yet, hearing it spoken in that calm, low voice sent a ridiculous thrill through me. "Leo." It sounded different coming from him. More solid. He gave a slight nod, a gesture of dismissal that was still somehow courteous. "Get into some dry clothes." Then he turned and walked toward the elevators, his posture perfect, his presence filling the space. I watched him go, my heart hammering against my ribs, the phantom heat of his hand still imprinted on the small of my back. I was left with the distinct and unsettling feeling that something had just begun, something I was utterly unprepared for. In the days that followed, that feeling lingered. The world had not, in fact, changed. My apartment was still too small, my bank account was still too empty, and my clients were still demanding. But my perception of the world, or at least my perception of the small corner of it I occupied, had been irrevocably altered. Julian Thorne was no longer just a distant, abstract concept of wealth and power. He was a physical reality. He was the warmth of a hand, the scent of wool and rain, the low murmur of a voice saying my name. I became a student of his habits. It was a quiet, obsessive little project that I told myself was just a way to pass the time, a distraction from the gnawing loneliness. I learned that he left the building every morning at precisely 7:30, always in a flawlessly tailored suit, and returned most evenings around 6. I learned that he never took phone calls in the elevator, preferring to stand in a comfortable, imposing silence. I noticed the way he greeted Henry the doorman by name every single day, asking about his wife, his grandchildren, a small act of courtesy that seemed to contradict the image of the ruthless billionaire I'd read about. My own routine began to bend around his. I found myself needing to check my mail at 7:25 in the morning. I developed a sudden urge for an evening walk around 6:15. These were pathetic, transparent attempts to orchestrate another encounter, and I knew it. But the brief, polite nod he would give me as we passed, the fleeting moment of eye contact, became the highlight of my day. It was a tiny scrap of connection, and I was starving. One afternoon, I was coming through the lobby, juggling a bag of groceries that was threatening to tear, when I saw him standing by the front desk, speaking in low tones with the building manager. He was dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him, in dark trousers and a soft gray cashmere sweater that made him look less like a titan of industry and more like someone you could actually talk to. He glanced up as I passed, and our eyes met. He gave me that familiar, small nod. And then, the cheap paper bag gave way. An apple rolled out, followed by a can of beans, then an onion, a cascade of my meager groceries scattering across the gleaming marble floor. I groaned, a sound of pure mortification, and dropped to my knees, fumbling to gather everything. My face was burning. Of all the moments for my sad little life to fall apart, it had to be this one, right at his feet. Before I could even register it, he was there, crouching down beside me. He didn't say a word, just started picking things up with his large, capable hands. His fingers were long and elegant, unadorned by any jewelry save for a simple, heavy watch on his wrist. He gathered the errant onion, the box of pasta, the carton of milk. Our hands brushed as we both reached for the same can of soup. The touch was fleeting, a feather-light graze of his knuckles against mine. But it was like the umbrella all over again, a small spark of electricity that shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. He paused, his fingers still resting on the can, and looked at me. His gray eyes were dark and serious. I couldn't breathe. The air in the lobby seemed to have vanished, sucked into the vortex of that single, suspended moment. He held my gaze for a heartbeat, 2, 3. It felt like an eternity. I saw a question in his eyes, something I couldn't name. It was as if he were analyzing me, trying to solve a complex puzzle. I wondered what he saw. A clumsy, anxious young man who couldn't even manage a simple trip to the grocery store? A lonely fool with a ridiculous crush? Then he blinked, and the moment was broken. He picked up the can and placed it carefully into the crook of my arm, his fingers lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary against my skin. "Here," he said, his voice soft. He helped me gather the last of the items, then stood and offered me a hand up. I took it, his grip firm and steady, pulling me to my feet with an ease that was almost startling. "Thank you," I stammered, clutching the salvaged groceries to my chest like a shield. "I'm so sorry for the mess, don't be," he said, and for the first time, I saw the ghost of a real smile touch his lips. It transformed his face, softening the severe lines and making him look younger, more approachable. "It happens," he didn't say anything else. He just gave me one last, long look, then turned and resumed his conversation with the building manager as if nothing had happened. I fled to the elevator, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. As the door slid shut, I leaned against the cool metal wall, my legs feeling weak. It was just a dropped bag of groceries. It was just a moment of shared, accidental contact. It meant nothing, but I knew, with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying, that it meant everything. The careful way he had handled my food, the brief but loaded pause, the warmth of his hand, it all felt like a message, a secret language I was only just beginning to learn. I was reading too much into it, of course. I had to be. But hope, I was discovering, was a stubborn, irrational thing. And it had taken root deep inside my chest, a tiny, fragile green shoot pushing its way up through the hard-packed soil of my loneliness. The rooftop garden was the building's forgotten promise. A small square of green on the 20th floor, it was advertised in the rental brochure as a serene urban oasis. In reality, it was a collection of cracked terracotta pots, a few sun-bleached plastic chairs, and a sad, overgrown patch of weeds. I'd gone up there once, during my first week, and hadn't been back since. So I was surprised when a notice appeared on the community board in the lobby a week after the grocery incident. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the font a simple, elegant serif. "Rooftop Garden Restoration Project," it read. "Volunteers are invited to join in returning our shared space to its former beauty. Saturday, 10 a.m. Supplies will be provided at the bottom." In a clean, decisive script was a signature, J. Thorne. My first instinct was to ignore it. The idea of spending a Saturday making small talk with my neighbors was my own personal version of hell. I was a creature of solitude, more comfortable with the quiet hum of my laptop than with the unpredictable rhythms of human interaction. But then I imagined Julian Thorne there. Would he actually show up? Or was this just something he'd delegated, a task for his army of assistants? The curiosity was a physical itch. I told myself it was about the garden. I missed having green things around me. I missed the feeling of soil under my fingernails. It was a lie, of course, but it was a comfortable one. I added my name to the sign-up sheet in my neatest, most non-committal printing. Leo, Apt 4B. When Saturday morning arrived, bright and unseasonably warm, I almost backed out. I stood in front of my closet for a full 10 minutes, paralyzed by the simple decision of what to wear. Everything I owned felt inadequate, either too worn out or too fussy. I finally settled on an old pair of jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, telling myself it didn't matter. It was just gardening. I took the elevator to the roof, my stomach churning with a nervous energy. When the doors opened, the sunlight was blinding. I stepped out onto the hot concrete, blinking, and saw that a small group of people were already there. A young couple from the 10th floor, a cheerful older woman I recognized from the laundry room, and him. Julian Thorne was standing by a stack of fresh potting soil bags, his back to me. He was wearing dark, well-worn work pants and a simple black t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. His sleeves were pushed up to his elbows, revealing strong, capable forearms dusted with a light smattering of dark hair. He looked completely different without his armor of expensive suits. He looked real, tangible. He turned as I approached, as if he'd sensed my presence. A flicker of recognition warmed his gray eyes. "Leo, glad you could make it. Hi." I managed, my voice a little breathless. "It's a nice day for it." "It is," he agreed. He gestured to a table laden with gardening gloves, trowels, and small pots of vibrant flowers: petunias, marigolds, geraniums. I wasn't sure what people would enjoy, so I got a variety. There was a quiet efficiency to the way he organized the morning. He wasn't bossy or commanding. He simply suggested tasks, his calm confidence making everyone feel at ease. He assigned the older woman to the delicate work of planting the new flowers, the couple to clearing out the old, dead plants, and me to the most strenuous task, turning over the soil in the large, central planter box. "It's been compacted for years," he said, handing me a sturdy-looking garden fork. "It'll be a bit of a workout. I don't mind," I said, and I meant it. The physical labor was a welcome release, a way to channel my nervous energy into something productive. I plunged the fork into the hard, dry earth and put my weight into it. It was tougher than I expected. For the first few minutes, I struggled, my movements clumsy and ineffective. I was acutely aware of him nearby, effortlessly clearing a patch of stubborn weeds, his movements economical and strong. I felt weak and useless in comparison. After a few minutes of my pathetic struggling, he came over. "Here," he said, his voice gentle. "Let me show you. It's about leverage, not just strength." He stood behind me, his body close but not touching. I could feel the heat radiating from him. "Plant your feet wider," he instructed. I adjusted my stance. "And hold the fork lower." Like this, he reached around me, his hands covering mine on the handle of the fork. My entire body went rigid. His chest was pressed against my back, his arms caging me in. I could feel the steady beat of his heart against my shoulder blades. His scent, earthy and clean, mixed with the faint, familiar trace of his cologne, filled my senses. My mind went completely blank. All I could think about was the feeling of his hands over mine, his long fingers guiding my own, the rough calluses on his palms a surprising contrast to his usually polished appearance. "Now, use your leg as a fulcrum," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my back. "Push down on the handle and rock back." I followed his instruction, our bodies moving as one. The fork sank deep into the soil. With a satisfying groan, a large chunk of earth broke free. "There," he said. "See?" He didn't move away immediately. For a long moment, we stayed like that, his hands over mine, his body a solid wall of warmth behind me. The sounds of the city below, the cheerful chatter of the other volunteers, it all faded into a distant hum. The world had shrunk to the space between us, to the feeling of his breath against my neck. It was the most intensely intimate moment of my life, and we were just turning over dirt. He stepped back, and the world rushed back in. "You've got it now," he said, his voice perfectly even, as if he hadn't just turned my entire world on its axis. He went back to his own patch of weeds, leaving me shaky and breathless, my hands tingling where his had been. I spent the rest of the morning working in a daze, my body on autopilot while my mind replayed those few seconds over and over again. An hour or so later, he called for a break. He had brought a large thermos of iced tea and a box of pastries from the good bakery down the street. We all sat on the newly cleaned benches, sipping the sweet, cold tea and admiring our progress. The garden was already starting to look transformed, alive with color and possibility. I ended up sitting on a bench a little apart from the others, needing a moment to collect myself. Julian came and sat at the other end, leaving a respectful distance between us. We sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city sprawl out below us. "My wife designed this garden," he said suddenly, his voice quiet. He wasn't looking at me, but at the planter box I had just tilled. "It was her project when we first bought the building. She loved it up here. Said it was the only place she could hear herself think." I was stunned into silence. I knew from gossip and old articles that he was a widower, but he never spoke of it. It was a part of his life that was sealed off, private. For him to share this with me felt like a gift, a small, precious offering of trust. It's a beautiful idea, I said softly. A quiet place in the middle of all this. I gestured out at the city. He nodded, a sad, small smile on his face. She passed away 5 years ago. I've let it go since then. It felt wrong to be up here without her. He finally turned to look at me, his gray eyes clear and direct. Thank you for helping me bring it back, of course, I whispered, my throat tight. He held my gaze, and the mood shifted. The shared grief in the air dissipated, replaced by that familiar, charged intensity. What brought you to this city, Leo? He asked, his voice low and gentle. It was the same question from my internal script, but hearing it for real was different. It wasn't small talk. It was an invitation. I hesitated, my own story feeling so small and shabby in comparison to his. A fresh start, I said, the words tasting inadequate. Or, that was the plan. Anyway, he seemed to sense my reluctance. He looked away, back at the skyline. You don't have to answer, he said, and the words were a balm on my frayed nerves. I know I can seem intense. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. He had just named the very thing that both drew me to him and terrified me. His intensity, his power, the sheer gravitational force of his personality. And by naming it, he had diffused it. He was showing me that he was aware of the imbalance between us and that he cared about my comfort. It was a profound act of kindness, of respect. You don't make me uncomfortable, I said, and I was surprised to find that, in that moment, it was true. I felt seen. I felt safe. It's just not a very interesting story. I would be interested to hear it sometime, he said simply. It wasn't a demand. It was an open door, left ajar for me to walk through whenever I was ready. He stood up then, signaling the end of the break. Shall we finish? He asked, and the spell was broken. We went back to work, but something had shifted between us. A wall had come down. We were no longer just a landlord and a tenant. We were two people, sharing a piece of their history, on a sun-drenched rooftop high above the city. And for the first time in a long time, my life felt full of possibility. The universe, it seems, has a cruel sense of humor. Just as this fragile new connection with Julian was beginning to bloom, my old, precarious life decided to crumble completely. It happened on a Tuesday. I was deep in the final stages of a design project for a new client, my most important one yet. This project was the life raft I'd been clinging to, the one that would finally get me out of the red and into a place of breathing room. I was adding the finishing touches, a delicate flourish on a logo, when my laptop screen flickered, hissed, and went black. I stared at the dead screen, my blood turning to ice. No, not now. I tried rebooting. Nothing. I plugged it into a different outlet. Nothing. I tapped the power button again and again, a frantic, desperate prayer. The screen remained stubbornly, terrifyingly blank. My lifeline was gone, and with it, days of unsaved work. The deadline was in 48 hours. There was no way I could afford a new computer, and even a repair would take days I didn't have. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. I paced my tiny apartment, my hands knotted in my hair. This was it. I was going to lose the client. I was going to miss my rent payment. I was going to be right back where I started, or worse. The walls of the apartment felt like they were closing in on me. I had to get out. I ended up in the lobby, though I had no destination in mind. I must have looked like a wild man, pale and disheveled, because Henry, the doorman, gave me a look of genuine concern. Everything all right, son? He asked. I couldn't form words. I just shook my head, sinking onto one of the plush armchairs and burying my face in my hands. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. And it was in that state of utter defeat that Julian Thorne found me. Leo. His voice cut through the fog of my panic. I looked up. He was standing in front of me, dressed in another impeccable suit, a leather briefcase in his hand. He must have just gotten home. His brow was furrowed with concern. What's wrong? Humiliation warred with desperation. I didn't want him to see me like this, a complete and utter failure. But I was at the end of my rope. My laptop, I croaked, my voice raw. It died. My whole project. It's all gone. The deadline is Thursday. He listened, his expression unreadable, but his attention absolute. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He just absorbed the information, his mind clearly working. He was a man of action, a problem solver. My small personal catastrophe was, to him, just a puzzle to be solved. He was silent for a long moment. I expected him to offer me money, and the thought made me cringe. I couldn't take a handout from him. It would shift the delicate balance between us into something transactional, something ugly. But that wasn't his solution. "I have a spare office in my penthouse unit," he said, his tone practical, decisive. "It's fully equipped. There's a high-end workstation in there that I never use. The software should be compatible." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "You could use it to finish your project. No strings." The offer hung in the air between us. It was perfect. It wasn't charity. It was a loan of resources. A temporary, practical solution that solved my immediate problem without creating a debt I couldn't repay. It was also an act of breathtaking intimacy. To be invited into his private space, his home, it was more than I could have imagined. I don't know what to say," I stammered, overwhelmed. "Say yes," he said simply. There was no pressure in his voice, but there was a quiet confidence, an assumption that I would accept this perfectly logical solution. "Come on, let's get you set up." He led me to the private elevator that went directly to the penthouse. As we ascended, the silence was thick with unspoken things. I was intensely aware of his presence beside me, the subtle scent of his cologne, the sheer size of him filling the small space. I felt a dizzying mix of profound gratitude and crushing anxiety. The elevator doors opened directly into his apartment, and I forgot how to breathe. It wasn't opulent or gaudy. It was a study in understated elegance. Clean lines, muted colors, vast windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was beautiful, orderly, and calm. It was the physical embodiment of the man himself. He led me down a short hallway to a room with a glass wall overlooking the city. Inside was a large wooden desk, a comfortable-looking ergonomic chair, and a sleek, powerful computer. "This should have everything you need," he said. "The internet password is on the notepad. Make yourself at home. Use it for as long as you need." I walked over to the desk, running my hand over its smooth, cool surface. I felt like an imposter, a street urchin who had wandered into a palace. "Julian," I said, turning to face him. I used his first name without thinking. It felt right. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," he said softly. He was standing near the doorway, his briefcase still in his hand. He looked as though he was about to leave me to my work, to give me space. But he hesitated. He just stood there, watching me, that same intense, searching look in his eyes that I'd seen in the lobby with the groceries. The air between us grew heavy, charged with a tension that had been building for weeks. It was in the silence that I found a sliver of courage. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening between us. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. He met my gaze directly, his own unwavering. "Because you needed help," he said. And I was in a position to provide it. It was a simple, logical answer. But it wasn't the whole answer. I could see it in his eyes. He took a step into the room, closing the distance between us slightly. "Leo," he said, his voice low and serious. "I hope it's clear that my offer is just that. An offer. To help you with your work." He paused, and the weight of his unspoken words filled the room. There is no expectation attached. He was giving me an out. He was acknowledging the power imbalance, the wealth, the age, all the things that made our situation so complicated. He was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that I was safe, that his kindness was not a trap. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the quiet integrity in his posture, the genuine concern in his eyes. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he was telling the truth. I also knew that the unspoken thing between us was real. It wasn't just my lonely imagination. He felt it too. "I know," I said, my voice as quiet as his, but steady. We stood there, separated by a few feet of beautifully polished hardwood floor, but it felt like we were on the edge of a cliff. The eye contact held, a silent conversation passing between us. In his gaze, I saw not just concern, but a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored my own. And I saw something else, too. A flicker of hope. A question. And in that moment, I knew that my life was about to change forever. The next 2 days were a strange, surreal dream. I spent nearly every waking hour in that quiet, sunlit office, immersed in my work. The computer was a marvel, fast and responsive, and with the pressure of a failing machine gone, my creativity flowed freely. I worked with a focus and intensity one hadn't felt in years, fueled by endless cups of coffee from the high-tech machine in Julian's kitchen and the sheer, overwhelming relief of having been saved. Julian was a ghost in his own home. He was there, but he kept his distance, a deliberate and respectful choice that I was deeply grateful for. I would hear the quiet click of a door closing in the morning as he left for work, or the soft sounds of him moving about in the evenings. He never interrupted me. Once, I emerged from the office, blinking, to find a small tray on the kitchen island with a sandwich and a glass of water, a silent offering that spoke volumes. He was caring for me, but in a way that preserved my independence, that never made me feel like a burden or an obligation. I finished the project with hours to spare. I sent the files to my client, my hand trembling slightly as I clicked the mouse. The relief that washed over me was so profound it almost brought me to my knees. I had done it. I had pulled myself back from the brink. And I had done it because of him. I spent a few minutes tidying the office, making sure everything was exactly as I had found it. I logged out of the computer, shut it down, and gathered my few belongings, my notebook, my phone, a stray pen. The finality of the act settled in my stomach like a cold stone. It was over. My reason for being here was gone. Now I had to go back to my small, empty apartment, back to my solitary life. The thought was unbearable. I walked out of the office and found him in the living area, standing by the vast windows, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city at night. He was holding a glass of what looked like whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. He turned as I approached. "Finished?" he asked, his voice soft. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I had to say something. I couldn't just walk away, not after everything. This moment felt too important, a turning point that could not be ignored. "Julian," I started, my voice tight. He waited, his attention fully on me. "Thank you. For everything. For the office, the computer. For saving me." "You're welcome, Leo," he said. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. The silence stretched, filled with the things we weren't saying. I knew I should just leave. I should say goodnight, and walk to the elevator, and let this be the end of it. But my feet felt rooted to the floor. I took a breath, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "It wasn't just about the computer," I said, the confession a quiet rush in the silent room. "This, being here, it wasn't just about the work." I looked at him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, my palms sweating. "This was it. The precipice. I feel something for you," I whispered, the admission costing me everything I had. "And I know it's complicated, and I don't expect anything. I don't. But I had to say it." I braced myself for the rejection, for the polite, gentle letdown, for the awkward moment when he would tell me I had misunderstood his kindness. I watched his face, searching for any sign of pity or discomfort. But I saw none. Instead, his expression, which had been so carefully neutral, softened completely. The tension in his shoulders eased. He set his glass down on a nearby table with a quiet, deliberate click. And then he moved. He crossed the space between us in 3 slow, measured strides. He stopped right in front of me, so close I could feel the warmth of his body, see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at me, his gaze searching my face as if he were memorizing it. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "It's not complicated for me, Leo," he said, the words a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. "I feel it too. I have for a while." He let out a slow breath, a sound of profound relief. "I was just afraid of pushing, of using my position. The last thing I ever wanted was for you to feel pressured." My own breath hitched. He felt it too. The thought was so overwhelming, so huge, that it almost buckled my knees. It was real. It wasn't just me. He lifted his hand, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I stood frozen as his fingers, warm and slightly rough, came to rest against my cheek. His thumb stroked gently along my jawline. It wasn't a gesture of possession. It was a question, an offering. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. It was my answer, my surrender. I felt him move closer, the subtle shift of his weight. Then his other hand came up to cup the other side of my face, holding me gently, as if I were something precious. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me with such raw, unguarded tenderness that it stole the air from my lungs. "Leo," he whispered, my name a prayer on his lips. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion or pin-up hunger. It was a kiss of arrival, of recognition. It was slow and deep and impossibly gentle, a quiet conversation between two lonely souls who had finally found their way home. His lips were soft, his touch sure and steady. There was no demand in it, only a profound sense of rightness. It was unforced. It was mutual. It was everything. When he finally pulled back, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. His hands were still cradling my face, his thumbs stroking my skin. I reached up and laced my fingers with his, my own hands trembling slightly. We stood like that for a long time, in the quiet of his beautiful apartment, with the city lights twinkling like fallen stars behind us. The silence was no longer tense or uncertain. It was filled with a deep, peaceful sense of belonging. The long, lonely ache in my chest, the one I had carried for as long as I could remember, was finally, blessedly, gone. The next morning, I woke up in a room filled with soft, gray light. For a moment, I was disoriented, the high thread count sheets and the unfamiliar weight of the duvet confusing my senses. Then it all came rushing back. The confession, the tenderness in Julian's eyes, the kiss that had felt like coming home. I was in his guest room. After our kiss, he had been insistent, his actions guided by a deep well of decency and respect. He had walked me to this room, his hand a warm, steady presence on my back, and simply said, "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." He hadn't pushed for more. He had given me space, time, a clear and unambiguous signal that he was willing to move at my pace. But in the stark light of morning, my anxieties, which had been soothed into silence the night before, returned with a vengeance. I sat up in the enormous, comfortable bed, my heart starting to thud with a familiar rhythm of doubt. What had I done? I had confessed my feelings to my landlord, a man 20 years my senior, a billionaire. The power imbalance between us wasn't a gap, it was a chasm. Last night, in the romantic glow of his penthouse, it had felt like we could bridge it. This morning, it felt impossibly wide. I thought about my tiny apartment 4 floors below, with its peeling paint and rattling pipes. I thought about my precarious freelance career, my constant financial stress. And then I thought of him, of this effortless luxury, this quiet power. What could I possibly offer a man like him? I was nothing. A project. A stray he had taken in. The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. I was going to be seen as a gold digger, a kept boy. The thought was mortifying. I got out of bed and padded over to the window. The city was waking up below, a river of yellow cabs and hurried pedestrians. It looked just the same as it always did, but my place in it felt irrevocably different. I felt adrift, uncertain. There was a soft knock on the door. "Leo." Julian's voice was low, gentle. "Are you awake?" "Yes," I called out, my voice raspy. "Come in." He opened the door and stepped inside. He was already dressed for the day, in a simple pair of dark trousers and a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He was holding 2 mugs, and the rich, warm scent of coffee filled the room. He walked over and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed, and I felt that familiar jolt, but this time it was accompanied by a fresh wave of anxiety. I pulled my hand back quickly. He saw it. Of course he saw it. His perceptive gray eyes missed nothing. He didn't comment on it, but a flicker of something, disappointment, maybe concern, crossed his face before he masked it. He walked over to the window, standing beside me, but leaving a careful foot of space between us. "How did you sleep?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Fine, thank you," I said, my own voice stiff and formal. I took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect. Of course it was. Everything in his world was perfect. We stood in silence for a few moments, the quiet between us no longer comfortable, but strained. He seemed to sense my retreat, my internal turmoil. He was a patient man, but he was not one to let things fester. He turned to face me, his expression serious. "Leo, look at me." I hesitated, then slowly lifted my gaze from the city below to meet his. His eyes were clear and direct, holding mine with a steady intensity. There was no pity in them, only a deep, unwavering sincerity. "What happened last night was real," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "For me, at least, and I want to explore it. But I will not do that if you feel trapped or obligated or frightened." He took a small step closer, closing the distance between us. Nothing has to change that you don't want to change. You will keep your apartment. Your work is your own. This, he gestured between the two of us, is separate. This is about you and me. And we can go as slowly as you need. We can stop at any time. Your comfort and your agency are the most important things to me. Do you understand? His words were a lifeline. He had seen my fear, understood its source, and met it not with dismissal, but with reassurance and a clear delineation of boundaries. He wasn't trying to absorb me into his world. He was trying to build a bridge between ours. The knot of anxiety in my stomach began to loosen. I understand, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I'm just scared, so am I, he admitted, and the confession shocked me. Julian Thorne, scared? It's been a long time since I've felt this way about anyone. I don't want to get it wrong, he suggested a date for that evening. Not dinner at a fancy, exclusive restaurant, but a walk through the city's botanical garden, followed by pizza at a small, neighborhood place he knew. It was a perfect suggestion, public but low-key, normal, a date that any two people might go on. It was another reassurance, another practical step that reinforced my independence and eased my fears. That evening, as we strolled through the blooming rose gardens, the setting sun casting long shadows on the paths, I felt myself relax completely for the first time. We talked, not about his business or my struggles, but about simple things. Favorite books, terrible movies, childhood memories. I learned that he had grown up in a small town in the Midwest, that he had a fondness for old jazz music, and that he was a surprisingly knowledgeable and passionate gardener. He listened to me with a focused attention that made me feel like the most interesting person in the world. As we were leaving the gardens, a man in an expensive suit approached us. "Julian, I was hoping I'd run into you," he said, his voice booming with false sincerity. He was one of Julian's business rivals, a man I recognized from the financial pages. His eyes flicked over to me, and his smile tightened. He gave me a quick, dismissive up-and-down glance, a clear assessment of my worn jeans and simple jacket. The look said it all. Who is this insignificant little thing? I felt a hot flush of shame. This was it. The test. The moment where the outside world would intrude and pass its judgment. I braced myself, expecting Julian to be embarrassed, to introduce me vaguely, to minimize my presence. Instead, Julian did something simple and profound. He turned slightly, shifting his body to stand more squarely beside me, a subtle gesture of alignment. And then he rested his hand on the small of my back, right on the spot where it had first landed under the umbrella. The touch was firm, steady, and unapologetic. It was a silent declaration. "He is with me." "Robert," Julian said, his voice cool and even. "Good to see you." He didn't move his hand. He then looked at me, a soft warmth in his eyes, before looking back at his rival. "Robert, I'd like you to meet my friend, Leo, my friend." The word was simple, but in that context, delivered with his hand resting so possessively on my back, it was anything but. It was a shield. It was a claim. It was a public validation of our connection, done with such quiet confidence that it left no room for question or insinuation. The other man's smug expression faltered. He gave a curt nod in my direction and quickly made his excuses, scurrying away. Julian didn't remove his hand until the man was out of sight. He turned to me, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" I could only nod, a wave of warmth and gratitude so powerful it almost choked me. He had seen the challenge, and he had met it without hesitation. He had protected me. In that moment, I knew that my fears were unfounded. This man would never be ashamed of me. He would be my shelter. And under the protective weight of his hand, I felt not small or insignificant, but incredibly, unshakably safe. Later that night, back in the quiet sanctuary of his penthouse, we talked. It was not the easy, getting to know you conversation of our walk in the garden, but something deeper, more deliberate. We sat on the comfortable sofa, the city lights a silent audience outside the vast windows, and we built the foundation of whatever this was going to be. He started it, turning to me with that same serious, thoughtful expression he'd worn in the morning. "What Robert did tonight," he began, his voice low, "the way he looked at you. That will happen again. People will make assumptions. They will be cruel. I need you to know that their opinions mean nothing to me. The only thing that matters is what is between us." "I know," I said, and this time, I truly did. But it's not just about them. It's about me, too. About my own fears. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be honest, to voice the ugly insecurity that had taken root in my heart. Julian, I can't be kept. I can't be your project. I have to be my own person. My life is messy and I don't have much, but it's mine. He didn't flinch. He didn't look offended. He just listened, his gaze unwavering, giving me the space to say the things that needed to be said. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering his words. I would never want to take that from you, Leo, he said finally, his sincerity absolute. Your independence is one of the things I admire most about you. You're a survivor. You're resilient. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression earnest. So we make rules. We establish boundaries. Your finances are your own. If you ever need help, and I hope you would come to me if you did, we will structure it as a formal loan or as a business investment in your design work, with a contract and repayment terms. Something that preserves your dignity and my respect for you. I was floored. He had thought it all through, anticipated my deepest anxieties, and offered a solution that was not only practical, but profoundly respectful. He wasn't just paying lip service to my independence. He was actively creating a structure to protect it. And your apartment, he continued, is your home. You should keep it. I would like for you to have a key to this place, to come and go as you please, to feel that this can be a home for you, too. But there is no pressure to move in, no expectation that you give up your own space until and unless we both decide that's what we want. We take this one day at a time, okay? I whispered, the single word carrying the weight of all my relief, all my gratitude. Okay. He reached out and took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. His palm was warm and strong, a familiar, comforting weight. Rule number 1, he said, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips. Honesty. No assumptions. If you're feeling scared or uncertain, you tell me. And I will do the same. I can do that, I said, squeezing his hand. In the weeks that followed, we lived by those rules. We built our relationship slowly, deliberately, like tending the rooftop garden. We went on dates, to museums and hole-in-the-wall restaurants, to quiet parks and noisy street fairs. We spent nights at his place and nights at mine. He never once complained about my cramped apartment, folding his large frame onto my lumpy sofa to watch old movies with a contentment that was both surprising and endearing. He did invest in my business. We sat down with his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who treated me with complete professional respect, and drew up a formal agreement for a small business loan that allowed me to buy a new, top-of-the-line computer and a few other pieces of equipment. It was a clean, transparent transaction that left my dignity intact and my business on solid footing for the first time ever. Slowly, the penthouse that had once felt so intimidating began to feel like a second home. I had a drawer in the dresser, a toothbrush in the bathroom. My scuffed sneakers looked out of place next to his polished Italian leather shoes by the door, but the sight of them together made me smile. One Saturday morning, several weeks into this new, fragile, wonderful life we were building, I woke up in his bed to the smell of coffee and bacon. I pulled on a t-shirt and padded out to the kitchen. Julian was standing at the stove, a spatula in his hand, humming softly to the jazz music playing from a small speaker on the counter. He was wearing a simple pair of gray sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair slightly rumpled from sleep. He looked relaxed, happy, and so devastatingly handsome it made my chest ache. He turned and smiled when he saw me, a genuine, easy smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Morning," he said. "Eggs." "Please," I said, my voice soft. I went to the counter to pour myself a mug of coffee, and we moved around each other in the large, sunlit kitchen with an easy, comfortable familiarity. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation. It was the simple, quiet intimacy of a shared domesticity, a dance that we were learning the steps to together. The clink of a fork against a plate, the sizzle of eggs in the pan, the low thrum of a bass line from the speaker. It was a perfect, ordinary symphony. We ate breakfast at the small table by the window, the morning sun warming our faces. We didn't talk much, but the silence was companionable, filled with a deep sense of peace. This, I realized, was what I had been yearning for my entire life. Not the wealth or the luxury, but this quiet sense of belonging, this feeling of being completely, utterly at home with another person. After breakfast, I took my coffee and went out onto the balcony. The city was spread out below us, a vast, sprawling metropolis, but from up here, it was silent, beautiful. A moment later, Julian joined me, standing beside me, his shoulder brushing against mine. He didn't speak, just sipped his coffee and watched the city with me. I leaned my head against his shoulder, a simple gesture of trust and affection that would have been unthinkable just a few months ago. He responded by wrapping his arm around me, pulling me in close against his side. His body was a solid, warm anchor in the vastness of the sky. I thought back to the man I was before him, huddled under an awning, shivering and alone, feeling so small and defeated by the world. And I looked at the man I was now, standing on top of that same world, wrapped in the arms of a good, kind man who saw me, who respected me, who loved me. The difference between them was Julian. He hadn't saved me with his money. He had saved me with his steadiness, his quiet care, his unwavering respect. He had offered me a share of his umbrella, and in doing so, had sheltered me from a storm much bigger than the rain. The age difference, the wealth, the power, those things hadn't vanished. They were still part of the context of our lives. But they were no longer a cage of fear and insecurity. They were just facts, like the color of his eyes or the sound of his voice. What mattered was the man himself, the quiet foundation of integrity and kindness upon which he had built his life, and upon which we were now, together, building ours. I was no longer afraid. I was steady. I was home. And I was ready, with my hand held securely in his, for whatever came next. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.